Help me out. Black people. Black people. Black people. Black people. Hey, my name is Melissa. I want the mic. I want the mic. Yeah, I do just right. Baby, get up on your feet. Baby, yell, baby, speak. Baby, do the bang, bang. Baby, go for your dream. On top of your head. All the time you live. But I'm thinking now and then I'm too late to quit. Oh, I ain't gonna shut up. So I'll make that quick. If you're ready to pay the loans, if the loans is up, all right. All right. Hi! I've been waiting for you. My name is Melissa Muganzo. I'm the Pride Center coordinator here at Sacramento State. Pronouns she, her, they, them, by the way. As a queer black woman navigating higher education as a professional, it's super important for me to center blackness. I mean, my own undergraduate experience, I remember feeling isolated, disengaged, invisible, like I wasn't even cared about. And yet and still, I hear black students today tell me the same thing, even with cultural centers and culturally specific programs. And I thought to myself, of course you do. We haven't centered blackness. We don't have you at the tables. You don't see staff or faculty or administration that looks like you. And then we literally forget about you after orientation. We do all this work to recruit you, to get you to higher ed, and then we say, why aren't they coming to class? We forgot about you. And then we mask it with student of color or underrepresented or marginalized. I remember hearing those same words, and guess what? I'm not a first generation college student. So let's face it, if we're trying to build a bridge and increase these numbers like we all say we're trying to do, that means we have to be more accountable. We have to center blackness at the root. You know, keep the same energy. So that's what I'm hoping to do. So in November, when I get a chance to talk to you about this a little bit longer, we're gonna knock it out the park. And we're gonna talk about ways we can all be accountable and put blackness at the forefront of retention initiatives. So I hope I get to you in November. Chat soon. As I recorded the audition tape for Student Affairs Speaks 2019, I was on my period. And I was super nervous to get up from the chair because I didn't know what was going to be there. But I was so excited about the subject matter because I spent 10 years as an educator centering black students. I was a black student once, and I knew what it felt like to feel isolated, even though you're in a space where they tell you you should be centered. All of my journey and all of my work was so centered around making sure black folks felt seen and heard. But my entire time as an educator, I was also a freelance entertainer, producing shows, choreographing, songwriting, developing, taking dance classes, acting classes. Little did I know that the next year, I would crack open and activate the energy inside of me to take my entire struggle with fibroids for the last 15 years into making a liberation project that would help others. That's when I became the Fibroid lady. Good morning. My name is Melissa Muganzo Murphy, and my pronouns are she, they, and sis. And it is Monday, December 21st, 2020. I have had an awakening in this last week that I want to share and I want to document. Right now, I am in the middle of embracing the fact that I got married this year. I bought my first house with my wife. I launched an entertainment company, and I finally listened to life thoughts connecting me to my purpose. And in the past week, everything just made sense, having a beautiful conversation with some newfound friends, Lisa and Kelly. And they encouraged me to create a documentary about fibroids. I was diagnosed with fibroids in 2012, but can think back to when I was younger and how it was probably there, and I just masked it with heavy periods and back pain and all these things. And now I'm ready to take my voice and my agency and my network on this really long journey to create a documentary called My Sister. It's time. When I first started to make this documentary, I decided to go with My Sister's Keeper, playing around with the word sister, and instead of putting SIS, put CYSTER, My Sister's Keeper. I held an online health conference. Folks were able to access medical doctors and practitioners from both the wellness industry and Western medicine. It was beautiful. But then I started thinking, it's not just about cis. And it's not just sisters. It's really people with wombs. It's womb holders. It's birthing folks. This is about reproductive restoration. This is about social justice. This is about a silent pandemic. This is about medical racism. This is about hysterectomies and fibroids and myomectomies and creating families and ovarian cysts and birth control and tampons and periods and acne. It's huge. It's so much bigger than cis. So while I am my sister's keeper, it really is about reproductive justice for all. I'm talking cisgender, transgender. I'm talking queer families. I'm talking youth. I'm talking elderly. I'm talking about our legacy holders that have been through hell bringing beautiful lives into this world. I'm talking about everybody involved. And so that's when I knew that I needed to change the name from My Sister's Keeper to the Big Hysto. Because let's be honest, a hysterectomy is a big deal. But the history behind the hysterectomy is an even bigger deal. And that's why this documentary is called The Big Hysto. All right, y'all, that was the #2 video, Rick Ross, MMG, Bag of Money. Shout out to the whole Maybach music empire. We love you here at 106 Park. But unfortunately, our time has come to an end, which means the #1 video is up just for you, and it's none other than Beyonce Knowles Carter with Countdown. That was the summer of 2012. I had just wrapped up my first year of graduate school and got this amazing internship as an orientation coordinator supervising family programming and engagement at Boise State University in Idaho. To say that I felt alone would be an understatement on how I truly felt. Here I am, looking to advance myself professionally and still have to negotiate my Blackness in a space where I should be focusing on professional development. This is also the summer I realized I wasn't by myself, that I was standing on the shoulders of ancestors and living legends and present-day game changers who knew exactly how it felt to be isolated, but knew how important it was to show up and show out for everyone involved. This is also the summer I recognized that access to rights, liberties, and protections in all industries and all forms was different for Black folks, and this includes our medical industry. Dr. J. Miriam Sims was born January 25th, 1813, and died November 13, 1883. You're asking, why do I bring up J. Miriam Sims? Well, he's known as the father of modern gynecology. Yep, that's right. The father of modern gynecology. His research is the framework for all of the reproductive surgeries and methods and data collection that are used today to shape how patients receive care. But if we think about time and context and access, how was someone like J. Miriam Sims in the 1800s granted access to perfect reproductive wellness practices and surgeries? Yep, you guessed it. You use subjects that don't have rights, liberties, or protections, and you perfect it on them. You take on the research and the data outcomes, and then you get noted as the father of gynecology.
His use of Black bodies as medical test subjects falls into a history that includes the impacts of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and the huge scandal behind Henrietta Lacks cells. Few medical doctors have been as hated or as applauded as J. Miriam Sims. There is even research that shows that he did experiments with and without anesthesia just to gauge how much pain people can take. Have you ever heard of that phrase, Black folks can take the pain? Black folks don't feel pain as white folks? Well, guess where you think that came from? Yep. Our good guy, J. Miriam Sims. As an artist and entertainer, dealing with fibroids while trying to perform and dance and act and work and be a person was extremely hard. By looking at these pictures, people don't know that I was suffering with bleed outs and acne and migraines and stomach pains and back pains because I had to keep going. I had a job to do. I had responsibilities. But once I realized that I wasn't by myself and that there were not only people out there that were suffering along with me, but that there was medical research about the distinct description on what fibroids can do to the body, I became activated and realized that this journey was set for my life to help me liberate myself and others. Here are their stories.
I was 17 when I first realized that I had, a lot of pain when it came. And I noticed that I started getting tired a lot. I was starting getting drained after school. I'm energetic. So I played sports. I'm always out, never in the house. And I realized that, I'm getting tired a lot. I'm always drained. I'm coming home from school and going straight to sleep. And I had no idea why. And I started feeling like I had, clumps. And I moved to Georgia for the summer to stay with my great grandmother. And when I came back, I moved with my aunt in Oakland. And I was telling her about it. So she was like, you need to go to the doctor. So I go and they give me an ultrasound and they tell me that I have ovarian cysts. So at 19, I had my first surgery. They told me I had endometriosis, and that was pretty much it. I had no information about what it was. They didn't give me any, options of what I can do to actually heal myself besides here's some birth control. But then over time, my periods started getting just as bad, cramping. I was losing jobs because I literally couldn't even go to work because I was in so much pain. So I had to take the days off. And after a while, they're like, you know what, you can't keep taking these days off. We need you here. So, you know how jobs are. So I lost a lot of jobs because I couldn't make it to work because I was in too much pain. So the birth control made me sick. And I was telling them, I can't take the birth control. It makes me sick, like nausea, all that. So they said, okay, we're just going to give you a lower dose, but you still have to take it. So they would prescribe it, but I never took it because I'm like, I can't take it. I'm not going to be sick, every day. So then I ended up having surgery a second time because I had cysts that grew back. Then I had fibroids. The second surgery I had, they cleaned up the endometriosis because it got so bad that it looked like a web, kind of like with my uterus and my ovaries. And so after I woke up from that surgery, the doctor was next to me. He said, you know, you had stage 4 endometriosis. And we cleaned it up and we took the cysts out, but we couldn't get the fibroids. You have to go to either Stanford or UC Davis to get the fibroids moved because it was too risky. So I said, okay. And he said, and also your tubes are blocked, so you can't have kids. And my mom was right there, and she told me, she was like, it's gonna be okay. She said, it's gonna be okay. And, you know, I didn't even cry. I didn't even cry in the hospital. I was just like kind of in shock. I was kind of in shock because, like, you didn't even ease into it. You said, I'm sorry, you know. I'm sorry, this is what you have to deal with.
And where I started having cramps. So I mentioned it to my mother, and she said that's normal. And then she would just give me, you know, tea and also like a pill. So whether it's Motrin, Tylenol, I have no idea. And it just went on like that for several years until I became an adult. And after I started having children, things ended up getting even worse. And so I went to the doctor about that. And that's when, well, fast forward. So after my second daughter, is when I noticed that things were like really bad. So I went into a doctor when I was about 24 years old. And I asked them about, you know, this heavy periods, going through several different pads a day, things like that. I had no idea. I didn't know if I was having a miscarriage. I just didn't know. So one doctor actually put me in for some testing, some blood work. And that's when we found out that I had endometriosis. But that was like several years later, I would say from 24 to probably like 36, was just me suffering in silence. Like my mother did not know, the doctors did not know what was wrong with me. And that was like throwing up, back pain and all this was like quote unquote normal. So I just kind of went with that. And I also just went with like different pain pills. I became, you know, dependent on Motrin and Tylenol. It was like not a cocktail, if you will, of, you know, things like that, which leads to a whole other, you know, slew of health issues when you can't, you know, use the restroom regularly, you can't function because you're on Tylenol all the time, Tylenol 3s. I went into the hospital at like 36 and I had like severe pain. And so I went to the ER. And once I got to the ER, they gave me something called, I want to say, Dilaudid, and through an IV. And I remember this vaguely, but people told me like you were completely out of it, and they could not figure out why I was in so much pain, huddled over. And then once in the ER, they actually did some x-rays, and when they did their x-rays, they found ovarian cysts, which I had no idea what they were. It was very interesting because I'm like, is that cancerous? What is that? And it was just like, well, no, it's just something that's normal. You know, your body is just not releasing it, you know, things like that. You have this buildup. It's all natural. It'd go away on its own. Well, they did not go away on their own. And actually, it had some friends, some more joined in. So then I actually ended up having to have surgery to remove them. Well, that was the option. The option was to have surgery. Okay, so fine. I had the first surgery, and I'm going to say 2008. I had the first surgery to remove all the ovarian cysts. And once they removed them, I shouldn't have this problem again because it's, you know, it's a normal process and your body will release eggs and it will not form. Okay, fine. Go on for a couple of years like that. Everything is fine. But then I started still having like really bad period cramps. So I thought. And then I started feeling these pains and I was just like, okay, I have to go back to the ER. Go back to the ER. I have more cysts. This time it was, one was the size of a grapefruit. And they had to go into surgery like right away. And it was just like, well, I'm sorry to let you know that there's no way that you can, like, it's not going to pass. It's not going to go away. You have to have surgery. You're going to lose this ovary, you know? So, and I was just like, well, I can't go on with pain like this. Like, I'm missing work. I have headaches. I have kids that I have to attend to. it's affected my life. And that was the only option I knew, because no one else in my family ever talked about it. No, I never knew anything about it. You look it up online and it's just slews and slews of just information. And it just tells you to go to this resource, but nothing actually giving you a resolution of what this is and what you need to do to correct it.
So in November of 2020, I started noticing like symptoms. I started having irregular bleeding. I've always heard people say like irregular bleeding between cycles, and I never really knew what that looked like until it actually happened to me. And I knew instantly something was wrong. Something wasn't right with me. I was having just random pain. What it felt like inside my vagina. I don't know entirely where, and then also pain during sex. And that's when I started noticing things happening. I'm definitely, for about 5 years, it will be 6 years at the end of this year, 2021, but I became vegan. I've been vegetarian for about 10 years, but I became vegan recently in the past 5-6 years. And that definitely affected my health overall in a beneficial way. My cycle actually got shorter, because I used to have a cycle that was about 7 to 8 days. And now, over the years, it's minimized down to 4. I've actually looked more into different herbs and minerals and more like holistic health. So I've been taking like ashwagandha, I've been taking sea moss, I've been taking, what was it, bud rock root, I think it is, if I'm saying it right, sea buckthorn, you know, all the good ones. So I just want to make sure I'm in tip-top health as best as I can. Seeing my transition from going vegetarian to vegan, or even before that, before I was eating meat, I just realized how much what you eat and what you consume really affects your body. And when I started changing my diet, I realized I had the most effect on me, whether it was me, like how I thought. I felt like once I went vegetarian first, I could think better, I could see better, I can even hear better. So making the decision to go vegan, it just made it a better process. And I realized that which were like vitamins and different herbs that we use, you can actually heal yourself better. Medical help and what they can advise can help as well too, but with me, holistic health has had the best impact and the most improvement on my life overall, so I decided to go with that route.
My middle child essence is around 11 or 12 at that time. And we decided we were gonna get married. And we brought our family back together, and we got married, and shortly after that, we decided we wanted to plan for a pregnancy. And so we did. We began to plan, and that was the first time in my entire life that I had ever planned for a pregnancy. And I was so excited because we definitely got pregnant. And I told him on Christmas. I told my whole family on Christmas with the card, with this pregnancy test. Christmas, he was so happy. I was so happy. January 5th, wake up to bleeding. I have to go to work. I have something to do, of course. My husband is in the living room with his friend. And I tell him that I'm starting to bleed. The hospital's across the street from the house and I need to go. He lets me go alone. I was angry. I miscarried. Found out by myself when I was there. Came home very angry. But more so, the depression comes again. Here's the depression. And I have to go to work because semester starts tomorrow or whatever that day was. Gotta go. Gotta get in front of that classroom. Gotta be on again. Didn't have time to grieve. Tried to reach out to a couple people who were supportive of me during that time. Closest family, sister, mom, didn't have them. They didn't get it. They were sad. They felt bad for me, but they were like, whatever. My sister was like, a month later, you still sad about that? So no emotional support there. I just stayed in that, whatever that was, operating and work. I'm trying to recant that timeline as I talk to you right now, so that I don't mix the different stories. And what I remember about that time is that from that miscarriage, I had called the doctor prior to the miscarriage. And I was telling the doctor that I felt a pain here in my left side. And it didn't feel right. And I was telling them, like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. And they were like, oh, it's probably nothing. You should just try to turn on a different side, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I went to the doctor. This is prior to the miscarriage. It's coming back now, prior to the miscarriage. And I said, I have this pain and it won't go away. And I went to, actually not the hospital across the street from my house, which was Sutter. I went to the clinic across the street from my house because they had midwives. The hospital did not. And so I wanted a midwife throughout my pregnancy, so I chose this clinic, which was not going to be like top-notch in terms of healthcare necessarily, because they dealt with people who were on medical, et cetera, sometimes. So, but I chose them because they had midwives. And I remember Dr. Skinner, or something close to his name, he was a male. And he was like, I was like, can you give me an ultrasound? Can we check? And he was like, you know, and he just kind of looked at me and listened to what I had to say. And he's like, well, let's wait for a little while. Let's wait a couple of months because, you know, you're this many months pregnant. So remember, I have this miscarriage, right? But prior to that time, trying to tell them about this pain. And he kind of ignored me or whatever the case may be. And after that miscarriage, I had to go to the doctor every Friday so they could check what's called HCG levels, which is the pregnancy hormone, to make sure that if they're going down, all of the fetus remains have been removed from the body. So that's like, for me, about 3 months. That's how long it lasts. So every Friday I have to keep doing this thing that is connected to this really bad part. But in that time, I get to see the Dr. Skinner again, and he gives me the ultrasound, finally. And he's like, whoa, it's a huge cyst. You're right. We're gonna have to refer you to the hospital because they may require a surgery for you. So I go home, and before I'm even home for like 5 minutes, I get a phone call from Sutter saying we have to schedule emergency surgery for you. That day was like, we have to have it tomorrow. Had you listened to me all those months ago when I told you I had this pain, can we check to see if something is going on? So I shared that with the doctor, Dr. Tilton, who had to perform my emergency surgery. She was gonna perform a cystectomy, and she was also gonna perform or do what they call a chromal perturbation. I might be mispronouncing that, but what they're gonna do is they're gonna flush blue dye inside of my fallopian tubes to ensure their health. And so I was like, okay, I'm absolutely fine with that. I woke up from the surgery, and they told me that they had to call in a general surgeon during my surgery because the cyst was the size of a mango and was enlarged into my bowels, which was outside of that particular surgeon's area. So they bring in the general surgeon, and then they tell me that the surgery was successful, but they did remove a fallopian tube because it was damaged. And it had all of those months of damage because the doctor did not listen to me all those months ago. But I was okay. I was happy because guess what? Now I at least know what's going on with my body. I have had this procedure, and they told me that I can still have children with one tube, and I have both ovaries. It's just that I need to wait 3 months because we as women, we ovulate on either side every other month. It rotates. So kind of check that pattern. Maybe you don't know the pattern, but check it out. 3 months later, I become pregnant. And that is a pregnancy we do not share. Again, until Christmas, interestingly enough. And by Christmas, I'm 6 months. And we shared publicly. My family knew, but we didn't share. We didn't talk about it because of the fear of all the other paths. And so Zion Joseph Moore is my rainbow baby. And he was born 8 years ago, April the 9th, 2013. He was scheduled to be due on my grandmother's birthday, who had passed away all those years ago. And so I told Dr. Tilton about what had happened to me prior and about me trying to tell the doctor about all of these things. So she began to investigate and look into it a little further. And what she then realized was that that cyst was the reason I had the miscarriage, because it was an ectopic pregnancy. And had they listened to me, we don't know what could have happened, but things could have turned out different.
I want to say it was probably back in 2016. I had actually just moved out to California, and I went to see a GYN, a gynecologist, and they were just kind of doing some testing, so to speak, to just kind of see what was going on with my stomach area, because it was extremely enlarged. I have a pretty small frame, always have, but my stomach was like just protruding, and I didn't know exactly why. So went to the doctor, and they ended up doing, I can't remember what it was called, but they did some testing and found that I had fibroids, uterine fibroids, and they were pretty enlarged, and they were starting to kind of like press a little bit on my bladder and give me like discomfort from time to time. So that's kind of like when I first realized what was going on back in 2016. I noticed that I had an enlarged stomach probably in 2015, 2014. I had a partner of mine kind of like point it out, and I was just like, oh, it's just a little poof, a little pouch, no big deal, I'm getting older, and didn't really think anything of it. And she basically was like, you should get that checked out. And I didn't really take it that seriously at the time. I was just like, it's fine, it's not really impacting me. And then probably fast forward to 2016, I started to have more complications. I started to have pain on a regular basis, and I was just like, I wonder if this is related to what she was talking about all those years ago, or whatever. So that's when I ended up going to the doctor and like getting some testing and finding out that I had fibroids. And I guess it wasn't that big of a shock. My mom also had issues with fibroids, very large fibroids for years, and she ended up having hysterectomy later on. I want to say when she was probably, I don't know how old she was, but maybe it was sometime in 2010 or so that she had a hysterectomy. But at the time, I wasn't really being impacted by it, so I didn't think anything of it. But when I did start to feel complications, then I was just like, oh, like this is a thing in my family. So yeah. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to experience that. I wanted to, and it's funny because I think there's a lot of misconceptions around folks who are more mask presenting, and so I even get mistaken for a guy sometimes. So people don't look at me and think that I would ever want to give birth and have a child. But I did. I wanted to. But unfortunately, by the time I was in a place where I was more settled in my career, where I felt like I could financially handle a kid, the fibroids had gotten too large, and basically the doctors told me that they were so large, and the position of where they were, it made them inoperable. So they could go in and try to remove them, but my uterine lining would be so impacted and be so thin that if I were to ever have a child, the likelihood that I would have a miscarriage would be really, really high. And that scared me. It scared me. So it didn't make me think that I should even consider trying to have them removed. She really just said that it was probably best for me to have my entire uterus removed. because I knew I couldn't go through the thought that I could get pregnant, but then lose my kid. And so I never got a chance to actually physically carry a child or give birth.
A couple of things. First, I was first introduced to fibroids and just uterine health from my partner. When we first started dating, this was like maybe 5 years ago. And I was like mostly like in a supportive role, just trying to be there for her and do whatever I could to, you know, be a good partner. It seemed like it was just like a really traumatic thing that was going on. And then, so that was kind of like my first interest is like, okay, I've been, you know, exposed to Black uterine health just like as a partner. Then just being a masculine presenting lesbian, I feel like this is a topic that we definitely don't talk about like within that community, you know, and so I just wanted to kind of bring light and voice and space to that, you know, that part of my identity. And then lastly, when I found out that I had fibroids, which was pretty recent, I was like, oh, that's just like the icing on the cake. I have to be, you know, a part of this documentary and get my story out there and just, again, really just create that space. And around like maybe April or March of 2021 is when I officially found out that I had fibroids myself. Prior to that, prior to me like dating my partner, I didn't even know what fibroids were. I actually thought it was thyroid, ironically enough. But so I didn't really have any challenges at that time. I was on birth control. I was using the IUD at that time, really to regulate my period. So I didn't even have a period for like, from the time I had my daughter in 2005 to like, for like 15 years or something like that. Like nothing, the IUD was like working for me perfectly. And then maybe like in 2020, like mid 2020, something like that, like my period started coming back a little bit, which I thought was weird because that was like the whole reason why I got on the IUD, and the IUD had been working. But I was like, okay, this is weird. Maybe like I need a new IUD or something, like it's running out, or I don't know. But I was engaged at that time. I might have been married. Don't tell my wife. I was engaged or married at that time, and I was in a same-sex relationship. So I knew there wasn't going to be a chance of me like getting pregnant or anything like that, or even getting like any type of STDs. So I was like, I don't even really need the IUD. I should probably just take it out, you know. So I went to Planned Parenthood, which is where I initially was getting my IUDs, and was like, I'm just gonna take the IUD out. And they were like, all right, cool. And so when I went to have the procedure for them to remove the IUD, they were like having a hard time finding it, like grabbing it. And so they were like having me come back like a bunch of different times so that I could get with different doctors that worked there that were like more experienced with getting the IUDs out. But each time I went, they still couldn't get it, you know? So the last time I went, it was a doctor or a nurse. I don't really know what their title is. A doctor or a nurse, and then like a helper doctor or a nurse. So it was like two people working together to try to get this IUD out. And the IUD is like literally like this big. So I was just like kind of tripping again. Like, why is it taking like so much for them to get this thing out? And it wasn't my first time getting one removed. But during the process, the doctor that was like primarily working on it was asking me like, have you ever had like irregular pap smears? Has anyone told you like your uterus is an abnormal size? And I was like, no. None of those things had ever happened to me before. And she was like, okay, well, you might want to talk to your primary care physician. I was like, okay, I mean, nobody wants to hear that. So I was like, all right. And so I did that, went to my primary care physician and explained to her this whole story of like my IUD and like how my period started coming back and what had happened at Planned Parenthood, and that I just really wanted to get an ultrasound just like to make sure everything's good. And so she ordered the ultrasound for me. I went to get the ultrasound done, and I was just talking casually with the ultrasound tech. We were just talking about family and life and just really talking casual. And I think she got really comfortable because then she was like, so how long have you had fibroids? And I was like, I actually didn't even know I had fibroids until like just right now. Like you just told me. And I think she realized like she probably did something that she wasn't supposed to do. So like we just quickly changed the subject, and she was like, you know, your doctor's going to be in touch with you, X, Y, and Z.
So I'm already 32, and we've been trying. So finally, at this point, a year has gone by, so they're willing to see us. And so we go to all the workshops and all of the things, and we get with a group of people. It's like a casting call almost. It felt very. It was not at all private. You're just in a room with 50 other people who apparently are also struggling with fertility. We get in there, and they give us a presentation and a pamphlet, a packet of papers to take home and read, and it's very impersonal, but it's like, okay, well, this is the journey that we're on. So finally we get our appointment, and I don't know if she was a nurse or a doctor, the person that we were with in our first appointment was asking me questions about my history, and she asked me, are your periods regular? I'm like, well, what's regular? Like, what does that even mean? And so I gave her more details, and she was like, okay, well, I think we're gonna put you on this drug that will regulate your ovulation, and we're gonna see if that will do the trick. The drug was called Clomid. And so I'm taking the Clomid, and we're doing IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, right? So not IVF, not in vitro. It's basically everything that we could do up until IVF, right? So everything that was covered under Kaiser. So we unsuccessful. We did that for another year. All of these IUIs, still nothing. And so at that point, we're like, so what should we try to do? Maybe we should try to get a second opinion and go see someone from outside of Kaiser. So we did the whole process of my husband changing his insurance to another medical provider so that we could be seen by another doctor outside. And when we had our first appointment with them, they're like, okay, well, we're just going to start with an ultrasound. And the doctor that was performing the ultrasound said, oh. I'm like, oh. Oh, what does O mean? And she was like, okay, well, I'm going to show you. And I will never forget this moment. She turns the monitor around where I can see, and she says, do you see this? And she draws on the monitor kind of with her finger like that. Do you see this? And I was like, sure. And on an ultrasound, it just, who knows what that is, right? Like I didn't pay attention in that class. You could be telling me that's my stomach, or you could be telling me that's, my lungs. I mean, I know what lungs look like, but you get my point. And so she goes like this. She was like, that's what we call a chocolate cyst. And I said, okay, well, chocolate sounds adorable, but I get the sense that it's not. And she was like, yeah, first of all, this should not be here. You have endometriosis, for sure. Typically, they can't detect endometriosis until they're actually inside looking around. But I had a cyst that was so large that she could see it even without being actually looking inside of my body. So, and it's called a chocolate cyst because it is blood that is congealed, and it's thick like chocolate, basically. So she was like, yeah, you've got endometriosis. You've also got a couple of these other cysts here. She was like, these are fibroids here, 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 here. And she basically sketches out a battle zone. Like it looks, I'm looking inside of my body and I'm like, I can't even believe that all of that is going on in there. So she's like, of course you can't get pregnant. Of course you can't. There's nowhere for anything to go.
I was with my second son. I was about 4 months pregnant, and they thought actually I was having two babies. But they took me, they had me go to a different hospital and get more of a thorough check. And then that's when they told me I had fibroids, which I had never heard of ever in my life. So they didn't even give me information to take home with me. So I had to research it myself in the car when I got done with my appointment. And it scared me because it really doesn't tell you much, but when you think of something like fibroids, anything that's not normal, you automatically think almost like cancer or something is really happening to your body, and what is this going to cause? So that was really, really scary. So that was my first introduction to fibroids. And then I think because of the fibroid issues I was having, I ended up having an emergency C-section with the last two. And then by the time I got to the last one, I'll speak a little bit more about that. But when I got to my third son being born, not only did I have an emergency C-section, but my fibroids were growing, and I was totally unaware of that. Again, because when they first told me about I had fibroids, they led me to believe that it's something just normal. It happens in African American women. You're good. Is basically what I received from it. Even though I went in the car and I researched it and all that good stuff, but at the end of the day, they were like, you're fine. They're so small, there's nothing to worry about. When that wasn't the case at all, so that was different.
So I started menstruation when I was 10 years old. I was in the 5th grade, and it was really demonstrative. Like, I started right off the bat with terrible cycles. I would have a lot of heavy bleeding. I would pass out. I had terrible cramping. I had PMS even at that age. So like up to my cycle, I would have headaches and mood changes and fatigue. And so literally since 10 years old, 2 weeks out of every month of my life is miserable. Yeah, it's like before your cycle, when your hormones are changing, your body reacts to it. And I've always been really sensitive to like my cycles, and I know when I ovulate, I can feel it. And so all of that stuff started like right off. It wasn't like a ramp up. It was like bad cycles day one. I got diagnosed with polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, in my late teen years, like 19, 20. And the doctors didn't give me any information. They were just like, oh, it causes your cycles to be irregular, and we'll just put you on birth control and you'll be fine. And so I started on serious birth control when I was 19, and stayed on it until I was ready to try to have kids, which was like 3 years into my marriage. And we decided, okay, we're ready to try. And I got off of birth control and didn't have a cycle for a year. My body was just like, we don't know how to do this anymore. And the doctor just let me free fall. And so it was just a really terrible experience. It was like, because my hormones control my weight gain and I wasn't on birth control anymore, I was just gaining weight and gaining weight. And it was just a spiral. I mean, the shame of not having a cycle, not being able to get pregnant, not looking and feeling my best. It was just an awful experience. I was newly married. I had just purchased a home. I was transitioning at work. I just thought, like every other married couple, when you're ready to have a baby, you could have one. And got off of birth control and nothing happened. And so for a whole year, it was just like every month checking and hoping and just not having any indication without a cycle. You just have no idea what your body is doing. And so after a year of trying to let my body do it itself, my doctor decided to put me on fertility medication. And so I started taking medication orally for hormones and for what they call insulin resistance, because that's associated with PCOS. So I started taking a diabetic medicine called metformin, which I had the side effect of diarrhea. And so for 2 years, I had diarrhea to take this medicine, hoping that I would have a baby, along with additional mood swings from the hormones and having to go get my hormone levels checked weekly. So I was at Quest Diagnostics at least once or twice a week. I was taking hormone medication. I was still working full time and just trying to balance all of this while having this hope of having a child that was never gonna, that what I thought would never get here. And the first time I got pregnant was 2 years into this process. And I was so excited. I was like, okay, I'm here. I got pregnant. The pregnancy test says positive. And it was just like, no. After 8 weeks, I went in at 6 weeks. They did the check, normal, showed the heartbeat. And then 8 weeks in, I started to spot. And went to the doctor and they're like, you're losing the baby, this is a miscarriage.
Doctors use weight. They used two things. They used weight was the primary thing. And the other thing was that, just a lot of Black women have those issues. And so it was weight and race. It was, well, most Black women, most of my Black women, female patients are, have these same issues. So it's just something about, the way your bodies are made that, make you have more difficult time when it's time for your period. I'd say for the most part, for the first couple of years while I had pain, I didn't have a lot of problems until I got about in my later teens, early 20s, when I started having really, really heavy cycles. I was put on birth control to help normalize the cycles. But in all honesty, my doctor just said, you're overweight and you need to lose weight. And once you lose weight, your periods will be better. Which I thought, okay, I'll do it. And I lost weight and my periods weren't any better. And I had a lot of complications. And as I got older, my periods got heavier and heavier to the point where it became almost a mental health issue, if I can say that, because I would have these super heavy periods and I would use multiple pads and tampons. Like I had all these different combinations to try and make sure I was good when I was out. But even that was stressful to make sure that I was like girded up or, protected in that way. And then going somewhere and always looking at the seat behind me or looking at my clothes in the mirror or, making sure I didn't have any type of odor or anything. And that became stressful. Like then the period, not only was it an annoyance because of, it's just that thing that happens every month, but it also became stressful. Because then I was like, do I have enough pads and things to change if I'm out? And what happens if I have an accident or I bleed over? And I bled over a lot. And I've had a lot of embarrassing moments. A lot of times when I left stains on things, and it was just really stressful. I probably OD'd more times than I can think about, just trying to make sure the cramps that I did have were stabilized in some way. I mean, I was popping the Motrin like it was M&Ms because I was just in, when I would have severe pain, it was severe. And it was just one thing after another with pain and going to the doctors and asking them to check me. And they're like, no, you need to just lose weight and you'll be fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And going through years and years and years of that frustration of, I guess, acceptance. Like, I guess this is just what it is.
So in my job, I see women in the clinical setting, in the hospital, in surgery, and on labor and delivery. So in the clinic, I see women day in, day out who suffer from fibroids and all sorts of gynecologic problems, including heavy bleeding, endometriosis, PCOS, you name it. They come to me with those issues. And my job is to help them, provide them with options so that they can choose what they would like to do to help themselves get better. And in terms of wellness, I think that that's part of being a physician, is not just focusing on the problem, but also helping them feel better in general. So I talk to them about healthier living through exercise and eating well and just doing what's right for their bodies so that they can feel better. Women who come to me have been dealing with heavy bleeding, large fibroids, discomfort, pelvic pain for a very, very long time, or they feel like they haven't gotten the care that they deserve. And so I try to give them the options that are available to the best that I can and let them choose what they want to do from here on out. I can't speak to all of the physicians that they've seen in the past who may have not heard them, who may have not felt like they cared, but when you see me for the first time, I want them to feel like I care, and I want them to feel like I'm going to do the best I can to help them.
Knowing that Black identified folks are more marginalized in the medical system, underdiagnosed, undertreated, and I see it in my own clinic. What happens when that happens is that they're coming in later when things are so bad that there's less we can do, because they were not given the support when their symptoms were mild or moderate. Only when it's severe and maybe they're going to the hospital instead of an outpatient are they getting the care, and at that time the options are more limited. And so that is a social justice issue, because this is not justice and equitable care for patients. Anybody who's got the same symptom should be able to express it and should have access to the appropriate diagnosis, treatment, and care and cure if there is one. And that is not happening. And to know that it's already not happening for women and men that are Black identified, but then you take that further and say, wow, not only are they not getting the care, they're actually more at risk for this disease. For example, with PCOS, that is absolutely unacceptable for us as clinicians to hold that and not do something with it. And so that requires advocacy, that requires education, that requires more research, that requires more in-services, and that's where we go and talk to other clinicians within our healthcare system and say, hey, this is what's going on in patient room A. I want you to know for patient room B and C, if you see this, let's do something differently. And so there's a lot of power that we hold on an individual basis, as well as within our communities, and then taking that globally. This is something that is an issue across the globe. PCOS and uterine health challenges do not exist here in the US, they exist everywhere. And so we know that we've got these specific type of challenges here with marginalization and with lack of equitable care, but we know there's other places that they may not even have access to care at all. And so there's many layers to the social justice lens that are required to do better.
After listening to Clara's interview about how she really wanted patients to feel seen and heard when they meet her and when she supports them during medical appointments, made me curious about other physicians and how they felt when Black folks arrived to the hospital. Thankfully, I was able to discover USA fibroid centers, a clinic that specialized in fibroids. Wow, I couldn't believe it. I reached out to them immediately and was able to build a partnership with them, and they even allowed me to meet the CEO, clinicians, and capture footage of the procedures. I was so thankful because I knew that this moment was going to be life-changing. So my team and I traveled to New York, met the folks, and was able to get some detailed information as to what brought the center to the forefront of this work and how this work is transforming lives every day.
Dr. Jan Katz-Nelson, founder and CEO of USA Clinics Group. That includes USA Vein Clinics, USA Fibroid Centers, USA Vascular Centers, and USA Oncology. I learned when we started USA Vein Clinics in 2005, that was amazing to see how patients come with a history of 20-year history of swelling and pain and cramps, and the short procedures make their leg as new again. They can start using the legs to the fullest, and it dramatically improved quality of life. Around 2015, we had an interventional radiologist who was helping us in doing different procedures, not only vein procedures, but also arterial procedures. And then we started doing fibroid procedures, and I was amazed how much we can change someone's life. I didn't realize until then how common fibroid disease was, how many patients suffered, especially Black women, because nobody talked about this. I didn't realize that 500,000 of hysterectomy done a year, mostly for fibroid disease, for benign condition, hysterectomy. It's basically castration. And I also didn't realize that the fibroid embolization, a procedure that we do, can take 20-30 minutes, done in the office, an hour, 2 hours later, we can send patients home, ready for beautiful life. And when we realized that we can create those miracles, we decided we have to dedicate our life, our focus, to helping women with fibroid disease. And that's been not easy, but extremely rewarding. I think we're in the very beginning of this journey. Uterine fibroid embolization. So uterine, we know what it is, right? It's in uterus. Fibroid, because we're talking about treatment of fibroid tumor. Embolization, it's a medical term for clogging blood supply arteries. So we're basically clogging the arteries that feed tumor. And what happens with tumor? It dies and shrinks. How do we do that? It's not a peel. We need to bring this clogging material. We need to bring it to the origin of specific artery that goes towards fibroid, uterine artery. So we do it with the help of catheter. It's a tiny plastic pipe, 1 millimeter in diameter, or even smaller microcatheters. And we insert it through the wrist or through the groin, through the needle. Local anesthesia, numb it, and do that. And sometimes we give also a sedation, so just don't feel anything, relax. And we take a picture through the catheter with the contrast agent to see how all the arteries go. And then we define that's the right artery, clog it. Then we remove the catheter, put a little pressure, and that's it. That's the whole procedure. Well, doctors, they do 10, 11 a day.
My name is Angela Harris, and I'm a holistic practitioner. Also, I teach and coach wellness in holistic nutrition, and also I'm a public speaker and I'm a published author. My professional journey began when I was in college, and I had the opportunity to be definitely a part of a holistic health and wellness industry. And when I was in college, I was going to school for accounting and business. And through working, needing income, right, to pay for my education and whatnot, and my livelihood to survive, I was granted the opportunity to work with holistic practitioners, holistic physicians, holistic dentists, and also just a clinical team of botanical pharmacy, biochemists. And so the exposure, I was just so grateful and thankful for, because it gave me so much insight on what did I really want to do. And I was already practicing, natural, holistic treatments and therapies just through my great grandmother. And it just kind of narrowed things down that, oh my goodness, this is something I really enjoy doing. So, because of that occupation giving me an opportunity, it allowed me to definitely be a part of an industry that I became passionate about and I believed in and I wanted to know more because it was very intriguing and interesting before it was popular and trending. So, in holistic health and wellness, that's whole body. And when you talk about uterine health and you talk about a woman's menstrual cycle and just what happens in that process, and so when it comes to like inflammation, when it comes to where the uterus is positioned, and when we talk about my scope of practice and the cleansing and detoxification aspect of it, and how the impurities feeds the inflammation, or the impurities definitely, create the cravings and the hormones, as 90% of the neurotransmitters are in the colon. And then most importantly, your blood supply and what feeds all of that. And so the digestive system that's 27 to 30 feet represents a part of that uterine health. And so with uterine health, what you want to remember is, what you do 2 weeks prior to, what you do, as far as hydration, as far as absorption, certain foods that may feed the inflammation that also, can connect to the uterine walls, as far as things are just muscular. And so what happens is, in fibroid health and wellness, what we do know is what you eat matters. What you don't release is a huge factor as to why people may have inflammation and things that are more chronic, and your blood supply and what that means to totally oxygenate the body to help reduce things that may create inflammation or that may create things to enlarge based on just accumulation of impurities, because the uterus is what also holds, whether it be fetus, whether it be impurities, because it is a storage.
Yeah, I think it's a global issue as well too. My dad's side of the family's from Ghana, West Africa, and I'm learning a lot of my aunts experienced reproductive issues, but there was no name to it. They would just know, especially we're talking about taboos, they were just know that they couldn't have children, or certain things like that. Then later along in life, you start to have conversations with them. It was like, no, you were dealing with something that's not a curse, your body was just different, but nobody ever told you what was going on with your body. So I think it's a global topic that needs to be talked about. Like Mishae said, it impacts Black women, or at least our symptoms do, more than any other race. And the question is why, and I think that's why having this conversation about why does it impact us and why is it so significant in like our lifespan compared to others as well too. So it's definitely a global issue amongst Black women throughout the diaspora.
I was at work one day and I just noticed I kept having to go to the bathroom more often while I was on my cycle. And I was like, this is just getting ridiculous, It was regulars to supers to extra super, And then I remember distinctively, I went to go change my tampon and I just felt like a flood just rushed out of my body. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this doesn't make sense because this is not how it should be working. And I messed up my clothes. Like, it was just a whole ordeal at work. And then I was like, I need to see somebody about this because this is not normal. And I've done all the things that I can think of, to support what's going on with my body. I had increased my birth control, because they also tell you that, if you're on birth control, well, increase the dosage and then I will help regulate your cycle some more. I had started changing, the sizes of, tampons and things that I was using. My pads went from, regular with wings to overnight with wings. And there was just really nothing else that I could do. I felt like I had done what was like my wit's end. So.
Mm-hmm. Very similar stories. Like, I really feel like it came out of nowhere. Like, I've always had painful periods, but there was this one day where I just would not stop bleeding. I had just moved to Philadelphia because I was finishing my second master's there. And I was under a lot of stress at the time too. I was going to school full time, working full time, adjusting to a new city, being away from my family. So I thought it was stress because I've never been underneath that amount of stress before. But after 5 days, normally I had a 5-day cycle around there. And then after 5 days, I was still bleeding. It was still like heavy bleeding. 7 days passed, still bleeding. 2 weeks passed, still bleeding. And it was almost 30 days. And it was my fault for waiting that long. I'm all like,
that 14 days, I'm like, I can't be bleeding this much. But, you know, I think there was still some shame around me, like trying to figure out like maybe it could be something else. And plus I wasn't feeling any pain. I thought it was something else. And so after almost 30 days of bleeding, I went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, you know, well, are you on birth control? I'm like, yeah. Well, your birth control is switching. I'm like, I've been bleeding for 30 days. I doubt that's my birth control. But I went with it not knowing what questions to ask because I didn't know what's going on. And so I changed my birth control, was still bleeding. And after a while, it came to a point where I became very weak behind the bleeding. Like I couldn't sleep. I was losing my appetite. And I decided to go to the doctor again. And this time it was a nurse practitioner who saw me because the doctor wasn't in. And so she was all like, she's like, have you been diagnosed with fibroids? And I was like, well, my last doctor said I may have. And she was like, well, what's the size of them? I was like, I don't know. They're like, did you get an ultrasound, a pelvic ultrasound? I was like, no. And she's like, well, how do they know then? They have to give you an ultrasound. So she gave me an ultrasound. She was a Black nurse practitioner too. She gave me an ultrasound, and they found out that I had 4 fibroids, 1 the size of a grape, and then 3 the size of a dime. And so she's like, well, one of them is positioned a certain kind of way, and that may be causing your bleeding. So she switched my birth control to a low dose birth control as well too. And she's like, it's going to take some time for this to, that was probably the most education I've had about what's going on. And then after a while I stopped bleeding and stuff like that. But that's kind of how I figured out that something was different about my uterus.
For some reason I stopped taking it. I don't remember why I stopped taking birth control. And then, you know, the symptoms came back with all the cramps and everything. And it wasn't until after I got married, so I'm in my mid-20s, where we were at a friend's house and I had some really, really bad pain in my abdomen on just one side. And I thought, oh, maybe my period started, like it was cramping again. So I kind of ignored it and it just kept getting a little bit worse, and to the point where it wasn't going away. Like I took Tylenol, I took like all the things that I normally take, and it wasn't going away. And then to the point where I was throwing up, and I hadn't done that in years. My pain hadn't been that bad in years. And so I was like, okay, this isn't normal. So we call Kaiser. They're just like, oh, okay, we'll come in. Let's see what it is. I'm in the emergency room for 4 or 5 hours. This really mean nurse, I just remember him being so rude. I had no idea what was going on. I was scared. I was in a lot of pain, more pain than I'd ever been in. Comparing it after having given birth, it's very similar to that. That's the type of pain that you're in. And so what was happening was my ovary had twisted on itself. So I had an ovarian torsion because I had a cyst that had grown big enough to twist it. And that is a medical emergency when that happens. So immediately they have to, admit you for surgery. And so I remember it being 2 or 3 in the morning and finding that out, and the nurse coming in, and he's like, oh, so I guess you really were in pain. And at the moment, I was just so kind of just in shock of everything that was happening. And I just looked at it and I was just like, yeah, what do you mean? And you guess I really was why would I be here if I wasn't in pain? I wasn't thinking about it. And then I remember asking, I was like, can I have some water? Because I'd been there for forever and they had me on some painkillers. And he was just like, no, you can't have water. You could asphyxiate and you're going to go into surgery. He was yelling at me. And I just looked at him and I just burst into tears. And I was like, I've never had surgery. I don't know what to expect. And then you could just kind of see in his face where he was just like, oh, sorry. I guess he kind of started to understand, but it was just that moment. And looking back on that, I was like, that was such a horrible experience. And he did such a horrible job taking care of me through that time. And so the outcome of that surgery, I ended up losing my ovary because I guess it was too twisted up and they couldn't do anything with it. And that was very traumatic. I went from being healthy, never having any major health issues, to all of a sudden you go into surgery and you come out missing a piece of yourself.
Yeah, when I got pregnant with the third one, they started, when you go in for your ultrasound and they start seeing anything abnormal, they send you in to go get another ultrasound outside of, just the organs of the baby. And so, of course, whoever had a fibroid check before, the ovary, they go in and they start clicking away, and as you know, they're measuring, right? So they started measuring. So of course I was like, oh, okay, they're just measuring my fibroids. I've been here before, no big deal. Remember, they said it was fine. I should be good. And then they said, oh, okay, they just seem to be getting a little bigger. And I was like, okay, still, you know, you're fine. Nothing to worry about because they're still kind of in that micro size. Okay. So again, I had an emergency C-section. And so that was a little scary. But after I had them, and let's go back a little bit. All three of my children were low birth weight, but the last two were both, one was 4 pounds, 13 ounces, and the other one was 4 pounds and 7 ounces. When I started to do my own research on fibroids, that having fibroids while you're pregnant can bring on low birth weight. And so instead of them trying to really looking at my file and seeing I had fibroids, they actually came to me when I had my third child and said, wow, you know, we need to talk to you because your last two children have low birth weights. Are you on drugs? Have you ever done drugs? And I was like, no, like you guys do blood work when we have babies, right? You know, so I was like, no, absolutely not. And so years later doing my own research, I'm like, wow, this could have been why I had low birth weight. Like, come on, right? But again, you know, doing my own research, I learned about UFE, which is another option not to even have surgery, period. And I wish the education was out there more, because just hearing about young women having hysterectomies, when I say young, I have a family friend, younger than 30, just had a hysterectomy because of her fibroids. But I think it's just a lack of knowledge.
I wanted to be a part of the documentary because I feel that it's important to empower women by sharing my story and letting women know that we do have agency over our bodies. To let women know that it's okay to advocate for yourself and to feel empowered to do so. That was something that I didn't do and I didn't learn until later in life. And so if I can get the word out to women now, especially Black women, that it's okay to be your own champion, then I want to do whatever I can to do my part to make sure that Black women are empowered in the space when it comes to their bodies.
I think that generational trauma around Black women's bodies as well has been a protective factor, but I think it's done us more harm than it has done us good.
I think in the research that I've done, it's definitely specific to Black women, African American women, at a higher rate than anyone else. But I do know that other women of other cultures, races suffer as well from fibroids, but just not to the same extent. I think this is definitely something that, you know, once it's figured out and cured for Black women, it's going to be able to help and cure the rest of the world.
This overall experience has impacted me by the way of keeping that I know my body, I listen to my body, I went to the doctor, and just to be in tune with what you know, right? Share your story, share your journey, because you're not the only person going through whatever illness you have. Whatever uterine problem you have, you are not the only person. And if I didn't share my story, I wouldn't have got the wisdom that I have got up to this date. So, you know, I would love for providers to really not only listen, but even if you know your knowledge, there should be a bare minimum of wisdom that you should be giving to your patients when they come in your door and say I have fibroids, or you find out they have fibroids, right? When I first walked in and I had micro-sized fibroids, you should have given me information on it. You should have told me what can I do to even reduce it, if that's a possibility, how not to get any more, if that's a possibility, and how not for them to get bigger, if that's a possibility. There was so many in between information that I could have got that I did not receive. For example, from my first diagnosis to getting more, I found out I shouldn't have been eating sugar. I shouldn't have been eating flour, dairy, all this stuff in between, right? And then here I come back with 7 and they've grown. Where was that knowledge in between? I found that again, sharing my story and other women sharing their knowledge. That could have been something that the physicians gave to me in 2009 when I was first diagnosed.
So I think a lot of the challenges that I've gone through regarding my uterine health have been due to a lack of information. And I don't put that as blame on anyone, any one person, any one individual. But I'm a rabid consumer of media. I love television, I love film. And had there been this kind of information out there when I was unclear and unsure about what was going on with my health, I know I would have found it. I know somebody would have recommended it to me. So if I can play a part in making sure that this story is available to the generations that come after me, I have to do that.
I think it's really important and powerful when people share their stories, honestly. And I feel like I've lived most of my life kind of like in the cut and not really being willing to come forward into the spotlight. And so I felt like this was an opportunity for me to be vulnerable with the world and share a little bit about some of my experiences. And my hope is that in the future, it can help someone else who might be dealing with the same issues that I've had to deal with.
I think that Black women do suffer a great deal from fibroids in particular. There are definitely healthcare disparities, and I think that as a healthcare provider, you need to be able to provide healthcare to all women, and we need to definitely decrease or equalize the disparities in our society, and that's why I want to be a part of this. We definitely need to focus on why, first of all, fibroids develop and why Black women suffer more from fibroids than other women. I think we need to do research. We need to pour money into that. And I think that we need to understand better what could make women feel better in terms of fibroids. And that means focusing on enrolling Black women into research studies. And I know that that's a hard thing to think about, doing research and being a subject of research. But I think it's really important to be able to get the answers that we need, because if we only enroll certain ethnicities in research studies, we'll only get what's right for them and we won't get what's right for Black women.
And I wish that I had looked more into it, and done more research to find out if there are certain foods that are better for you if you're trying to to shrink fibroids, or there are certain foods that you should stay away from. And it was like I found out all of this after I had my hysterectomy, and it was actually because I joined a Facebook group around folks who had uterine fibroids, and there was all this discussion about it, and I was just like, dang, I wish I had known. I would have waited, I would have tried other things. I would have, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. I felt like this was my only option.
Well, I wanted to contribute my expertise and knowledge and credentials in my scope of practice. However, I do have family members that have had fibroid surgery that struggle with fibroids. And this happened, at a young age in my life. So for me, being exposed to holistic health and wellness in college, it helped me to be preventative and proactive. Else I could have been in the same situation. So all the things that I do, as far as my regimens, as far as my recommendation, my wellness coaching, I live by. And I'm also in that generation of my family, a living, breathing example, as I didn't get fibroids. That wasn't my health challenge, right? And so therefore, just knowing those things and seeing how they went through that and just changing, all the things that could potentially contribute to that, it totally worked because it does run in my family. I think the more we educate, the more there's an awareness. So people have an informed decision and choice, even if they're not sure what direction they're going to go in, but at least they have the information in order for them to determine, is this the route they choose to take? Or they've exhausted other routes. is not working, and so therefore they want to try a different approach.
Not every Black person in the world is going to have fibroids. They're not going to have a uterine health challenge. But for those that do, to know that there are more ways of finding healing, whether that be for folks just having, incorporating holistic practices in their life, whether that be getting a medical procedure early so they can know what's going on, whether that be knowing about things that can cause harm to the body, just to open up conversations. People know that you're not isolated. You're not navigating this by yourself. You have people, you have community. There are legislators that are out there putting energy so that the future can be brighter for folks that if, for some strange reason, they still come across a situation where they're diagnosed with fibroids, it's not the end. For families that are looking to have babies and have been trying, and due to uterine health challenges, they haven't been able to do it. For folks that have babies and breastfeeding is hard, for folks that have had multiple surgeries. I mean, there's so many people out there that are seeking understanding and justice. And so that's what I'm hoping this documentary does, is give people options, let them know they're not by themselves, and normalize the conversation of wellness regarding our wombs. When I first set out to make this documentary, all I wanted folks to feel was me. I wanted to feel supported. I wanted to feel loved. I wanted to feel heard. But once making the documentary, I realized that it was bigger than me. It was about justice. It was about advocacy. It was about support. It was about community and recognizing that the world cannot move without womb health. Everybody is here because the womb sacrificed for them to be here. And it is my honor to be able to advocate on behalf of the future and also honor and recognize and celebrate the past. So now the real question is, how do you plan to show up for the future of the womb? To protect it, to honor it, to love it, and to ensure that the future has all access to all options, all liberties, and all protections. I'm proud. And to finance it myself is crazy. It's crazy. So I'm just thankful to the cast. I'm extremely grateful and thankful to the crew. Essence and Smitty, I love you. Thankful to my wife, who has been rocking with me, listening to all of my ideas, all of my venting, all of my learning, all of my processing, and just rocking with me, sending me champagne to my room secretly. So I take a moment to cheers and toast and process, because I love them bubbles. And so here I am now. I'm thankful to Susan, who was the one that actually diagnosed me with fibroids. I'm thankful to Rashette, that introduced me to herbs and the healing that can happen naturally. Really grateful. Really grateful. Because I wouldn't have this documentary without it. I wouldn't be able to liberate other people, empower other people, hire other people, mentor other people, have experience with other people if it wasn't from my journey, which for 10 years I thought was pointless. The magic and the miracle came about 10 years later. Talk about time. Taking time. So yeah. And to remind myself of where I am and what I'm doing, I'm sitting in my hotel room in the middle of Times Square on the 10th floor. Probably about to watch Martin or A Different World. Oh, actually, I think the Hip Hop Awards, I'm probably gonna watch that because I gotta watch my people, okay? If it's black, it's perfect. That's it, period. So that, yeah, I'm 33 years old. It's my Jesus year. And on the brink of my 34th birthday, I'm producing a documentary. I'm proud of myself. I have so much to learn, but I'm proud. All right. Peace, y'all. If you ever see this, really, really thankful. And thank you for coming to see this documentary. Wherever you are, whoever you are, thank you. Black lives matter. Black trans life matter. Black queer love is everything. Blackness is perfect, and it makes the world go round. Just as a reminder, I had to say that shit. All right, leave your little ballroom. Queen Naomi. Good night, y'all. Oh no, what law say? You did what needed to be done.